Martin Luther King translated the dream of millions of people into "I have a dream." Do we need a dream for ecology?
Obviously, yes. And it's, I don't know, for me, it's kind of tapping into to all that goes on deep within us, the lament, the fear. You know, there's a real deep sense of mourning, but at the same time, when you lament something, that for me, that gives you energy for hope and movement. You know, so there's a real dialectic, real dynamism, tension going on within. And to be able to let that be expressed, and that's a real dream, I think. And I think maybe right now, there's something going on there for me regarding that. I have a dream. Sir, I do have a dream. And maybe that's what Laudato Si tries to do as well, you know, express through the gospel of creation and the spirituality that weaves through all of Laudato Si. The analysis is essential. We can't do without it, and we need more of it. But at the same time, there's a dream. There's an energy that's pulling us forth as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary Evelyn Tucker from Yale. I just wanted to mention, as I'm sure you know, in 1988, Thomas Berry wrote a quite influential book called The Dream of the Earth. And he was calling 35 and 40 years ago for exactly this sensibility. And he also called for a new story, which was that Teilhard de Chardin had this sense of the evolution of the whole universe. So I love what you did. Of course, I love what Peter has done. And that the complementarity, I think, of telling the story of evolution, as we've tried to do in Journey of the Universe, as Brian Swim did in Universe Story, is absolutely essential to all of this. Because once we have a cosmological 14 billion year universe story, the depths of our wonder and awe, I think, will be extended considerably. So it's a wonderful combination of evolution and awe here that Thomas Berry was talking about as well.
Thank you. It was Peter's idea, so.
The what?
It was your idea, yes.
Oh.
Along the same line, a biologist, Ursula Goodenough, at Washington U, wrote a book some years ago called The Sacred Depth of Nature, and she had a very similar theme in that book.
Right, yes, thank you, yeah.
In some sense, what we're trying to do is to develop all parts of the world so that they'll be sustainable and so that they'll relate to one another sustainably. And of course, a major part of what we ought to be trying to do there is to preserve nature to the extent that we can in reaching a sort of stability. In some sense, Ed Wilson's idea of half Earth, leaving half of the Earth uncultivated and undamaged is such a dream, but I think we need many more such dreams in order to really inspire ourselves to action. I completely agree with what's been said directly or touched on by several earlier speakers, that unless we have a moral depth, a love, and a caring in us as we think about these things, we're very unlikely to do more than to keep dividing the earth up for short-term profit. And that doesn't work for the earth, and as Father McCarthy has said so well, it doesn't really work for ourselves either. It's not worthy of us.
Thank you. Heather Eaton from, where am I from? Ottawa. I want to just suggest that we can go farther with this reflection, both of whom, I appreciated both of them, in the sense that the richness of the natural world and the evolutionary process is what formed the human sensibilities, including our, whatever we call our spiritual sensibilities, our sense of aesthetics and meaning, which means that the destruction of the natural world will also be the destruction of the interiority of the human. That it's not, the natural world is not just a place of meaning, although I appreciate that we brought that depth because I think economics can never get at this, science can't get at this, but I think the relationship is actually much more intimate, that we have interior sensibilities because of the richness and diversity of the natural world.
Just a response to Heather, yeah, I think it was Thomas Berry that said, yeah, what if we all grew up on the moon, you know, rather than becoming lunatics, we would be, how would that determine our music, our art, our culture, our writings and that, yeah, so. Yeah. It's good.
Think of what we do when we put people in jail.
Hello, my name's John Hickey. I'm with the Missouri Sierra Club, and I thought both your presentations were great. I've got a question for Father McCarthy, though. Here in the real-world politics of Missouri on climate change, the forces of organized religion are almost always on the other side. Almost always, if you look at a particular candidate, you look at a political party, you look at legislation, the environmentalists are on one side, and the Missouri Baptist Convention, the Missouri Catholic Conference, the et cetera, is on the other side. How do we get the organized religion political infrastructure to look at the world like you do, so that they're not somebody that's on the wrong side of climate politics in Missouri?
Well, before Father McCarthy answers that, I'll just point out that we have a couple of very fine evangelical leaders on attention to climate change speaking tomorrow. And a good deal of what we're talking about tomorrow is going to be precisely directed to that. It's how to bring people together to get them to understand common values. And I would submit that religions, both evangelical religions, Protestant religion, Catholic religions, and the others about which I know very little, generally agree that damaging the welfare of the poor is a serious crime, a serious sin, and one that we need to overcome. And that played out properly and explained properly with respect between groups will help to heal this. I think when the Sierra Club operates in Missouri, they've got to not start by assuming that the evangelicals and the Southern Baptists that are so common, and Catholics in Missouri certainly, are going to be against them, but find out what they do think over a wide range of things, get to know them, and then you'll probably find there's a lot less difference than there seems to be superficially.
Just to add to that, I know I can't speak to Missouri politics, but the emphasis by Pope Francis in Laudato Si on dialogue and conversation, really across ideological chasms, and in many ways, our societies have become very polarized in many respects, and so how it's going to take men and women of courage and of humility to be able to step across those chasms and those divides to hear what the others have to say. So that's why I think in Laudato Si, the emphasis on dialogue is so key, and it's so central and so evident throughout the encyclical, for the very reason that you pointed out.
Don't assume just because you disagree with someone on some things that they will automatically disagree with you on others. That's a sort of non-respectful, and it leads to real just endless fighting, which is exactly what we need to try to avoid.
My name's Kevin Maurer. I'm with the Virginia Catholic Conference. I apologize for not having a specific question, but I just wanted to clear something up. I don't know if there's anybody from the Missouri Catholic Conference here, but I looked on their website, and they have advertised this event, and they do support it.
Just wanted to go back to the idea of preserving. I'd just like to raise a challenge and it's one that is, I think, here for the St. Louis area is, of course, we're living on top of a nearly extinct ecological region, the Great Prairie region. And as a prairie ecologist, I find that one of the ways that I can get to the soulfulness with my students is to go beyond mere preservation into active regeneration, recreating, and indeed bringing thinking in terms of how to take urban streams, the river to pair locally, and to in some way find those areas that we can rewild it. How do we rewild our campuses, and how do we rewild and bring back what we can bring back, realizing it's going to be a novel ecosystem, but it might be a whole lot more fun and satisfying than lawn. Thank you.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Hi, Father, you referred to contemplative ecology, and I'm wondering in the recent book Drawdown, Paul Hawkins, in his article, he talked about how community is really the answer, and he quoted Bill McKibben saying that the I is the problem and the we is the solution. And so I'm wondering if you see some things from the contemplative life that's been a big part of Catholicism from the beginning, if you see that there's some value there that could be embraced by the larger culture. I'm very interested in the intentional communities movement, co-housing, eco-village, cooperative business, and I see where all of these things could be advanced a lot quicker if we did it in community rather than trying to do it as individuals in very small groups. So I'd like your comments on that.
Thank you. When I think of community and contemplation, I immediately think of like the monastic communities, just a religious life in the church, and just the relationship to space and place that they developed. You know, they used to say the Benedictines went to the mountains and the Cistercians went to the valleys, and then the Jesuits went to the cities. I should have become a Benedictine or a Cistercian, but
Wait a minute.
The whole thing of contemplation, it's almost like it's like a letting be. There's almost like no judgment. There's a letting be and a letting see, and see what emerges, and so rather than immediately trying to say, well, this now will become the human project. Let us now create something for ourselves. There's almost a letting go. There's an asceticism. There's a dying to oneself to say, well, what is there before me? Because it is of God, Cardinal Turkson would say, it is of God's beauty and God's love, and therefore has its own intrinsic life, if you will. You know. So the contemplation, in a sense, for me, it puts the brakes on the immediate activity or project or taking over. But it kind of lets one, either individually or communally. How do you do that as a group? That's even a greater challenge sometimes. But what do we need to do before the ecosystem or the biome in which we live? You know, how do we let be and let live on a communal and natural level? So it's that not wanting to grasp or to take over or to manipulate or to appropriate. But there's another way of letting go, of dying to oneself, and seeing what emerges. So for me, that's very much a heart of a contemplative dimension, vis-a-vis nature, the natural world. You know, I know for myself personally, that's where my cathedral, if you will. I mean, I entered the Jesuits when I was 25, but I knew I had a religious vocation when I was just in the woods. I mean, just in the nature really taught me for many, many years. The sense of silence, the sense of beauty, that I didn't create this. I did not make this. I cannot recreate it. And so what is it about the givenness of nature, the givenness of the beauty of diversity and all that's before us? There's something quite profound and kind of mystical, if you will, about that. How that gets translated politically and economically, yeah, that's a real challenge is there. But as a stance, as a contemplative stance, that's where I find my grounding, if you will.
On that line, I would like to recommend to anyone here who hasn't read it recently to read John Muir's My First Summer in the Sierra. It's just about a perfect book about contemplation and letting things be and looking at them and learning about them. Whereas Andrea Wolf's book about Alexander von Humboldt is that too, but in a more scientific and stiffer way. But John Muir's book is pure poetry, and I really do recommend it. And he, of course, translated his life into one of complete action, founded the Sierra Club, contributed to enormous efforts to put aside most of our national parks from then on to the present. But it's a lovely book. Do read it.
We have time for one more question.
So in a world that's become less spiritual and more mobile with more displacement, how do we begin to rebuild the connections with nature, especially when it seems like it only takes a generation or two to break it, and when there's such an emphasis on assimilation and challenges with language loss and cultural loss and loss of tradition?
That's a big question. You want to
Well, by understanding it, by working yourself to preserve it, the nature that we have around us, and especially by getting your children outdoors and teaching them about nature, making sure that they understand about it, not as something that they see very occasionally from a school class, but something that is a major part of their lives so that they can feel like Father McCarthy feels about the need for it. We need all of those things as kind of a basis for building a citizenry that will strongly protect what we have, cut back on our consumption, and ultimately build a sustainable world.
The challenge the question you have is an amazing challenge, and just a simple story about the myopic. Many young children now are myopic. Why? Because they're not outdoors. Apparently it's a very simple solution, just to be outdoors and less on our devices. I mean, it's a real challenge what you've brought up for sure. Yeah,
I was wryly thinking they are outdoors, but they're blocked from seeing it by the walls around them and the electronics and everything else. Yeah. We're all outdoors all the time, whether we think about it or not.
Let us thank our speakers again.